Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered how people with brain injuries manage to communicate in a group, or why some people struggle to adapt what they say to different listeners? Well, this new study dives deep into that very question. In this fascinating study, researchers wanted to understand how we naturally adjust what we say and do when talking to more than one person at the same time. Think about talking to a group of friends where some know exactly what you are talking about, and others are completely new to the topic. You unconsciously change how you explain things, right? This process is called audience design. But what happens when someone has a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, or TBI? How does that affect their ability to adjust their communication, not just with words, but with gestures, and even where they look? This study tackles that by looking at spoken language, gestures, and eye gaze all together. So, how did they figure this out? They gathered two groups of people, 30 adults who had experienced a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury at least 6 months earlier, and 30 people who hadn't had any brain injuries. They matched them up based on things like age and education. So the groups were as similar as possible, except for the TBI itself. The main part of the study involved the game first, in what they called the sorting phase. Everyone described a bunch of abstract images over and over to two helpers called matchers. The idea here was for the participants and the matchers to learn about the images together, building common ground or shared knowledge. They did this for 4 rounds. Then came the test phase. This is where it got really interesting. The participants described the same images again, but this time to different pairs of matchers. These pairs were set up in 3 ways. Either both matchers knew a lot about the images, knowledgeable group, or both were completely new to them, naive group, or one knew a lot and the other was new mixed group. This allowed the researchers to see how the speaker adapted their communication depending on how much the listeners knew. Now, here is where it gets high-tech. They didn't just listen to what people said. They used fancy video tracking to measure the exact movements of their hands when they gestured. Looking at things like how big the gestures were, how fast the hands moved, and even if they paused in certain ways, they also carefully watched where each person looked, noting every time they looked at either of the two matchers. So what did they find for the people without brain injuries? Everything worked pretty much as expected. They adjusted their words, their gestures, and where they looked, all in sync to make sure the people who knew less understood them better. When talking to people who were new to the images, they gestured more and their gestures were more elaborate. They also used their eyes to check if the new listeners were following along. It was a smooth, coordinated effort. But here is the surprise. The participants with TBI didn't just struggle everywhere, while they did show a bit less flexibility in their spoken words, meaning they didn't change their speech as much when talking to naive listeners compared to the non-injured group. They actually did really well in other areas. They showed impressive adaptation in the way they gestured, making their hand movements more complex and informative for naive listeners. Even more surprisingly, they also seemed to know when and where to look. They directed their gaze more towards the listeners who were new to the information. Just like the non-injured group, this suggests they were aware of what each person knew, even if their spoken words didn't always show it as clearly. Another interesting difference was that people with TBI tended to gesture more overall, even when talking to someone who already knew the information. This might seem like too much, but it could be their way of compensating or packing more information into their communication. What does this all mean? Well, it tells us that we can't just look at spoken language to understand communication challenges. After a TBI, we need a multimodal approach, looking at words, gestures, and eye gaze together. For people with TBI, even if their spoken language adaptation is a bit weaker, they might still be effectively using gestures and eye gaze to communicate. The researchers think this divergence in how people with TBI adapt their communication comes down to different cognitive processes. Spoken language adaptation seems to be more heavily reliant on certain cognitive functions that can be impaired by TBI, like memory and executive functions, which help us plan and switch between different perspectives. But gesture and eye gaze might tap into different cognitive pathways that remain more intact. For instance, the fact that they still directed their gaze to the naive listeners shows that their ability to understand who knows what was often preserved. They specifically mentioned that problems with declarative memory, which is our memory system for facts and events, could explain some of the difficulties with spoken language. It is like if you can't quite recall the specific details of a past conversation, it is harder to adjust what you say now based on that shared history. Social cognition, which includes our ability to understand what others are thinking and feeling, is also crucial. While TBI can affect these abilities, the study suggests that the participants with TBI were able to track who knew what. They just might have had a harder time translating that knowledge into adjustments in their spoken words. Executive functions like our ability to plan, switch tasks, and control our attention are also often impacted by TBI. These are important for switching between different people's perspectives. The study suggests that while people with TBI might have the knowledge about their listeners' understanding, they might struggle with the mental juggling act required to effectively use that knowledge to adjust their speech. What is really exciting is what this tells us about gesture. It seems that gesture might be a really valuable tool for individuals with TBI. We saw they adjusted their gestures for naive listeners, making them more visually prominent. But they also gestured a lot even when the listener was knowledgeable. This could be because gestures help organize thoughts and reduce the mental load. Imagine trying to explain something complex. A gesture can help you package that idea more easily, almost like drawing a picture in the air. For someone with TBI, the self-benefit of gesturing might be particularly important, even when they're trying to communicate with others. This study is groundbreaking because it is the first to use advanced motion tracking to analyze the precise movements of gestures in people with TBI. This gives us a much more detailed and objective understanding of how their gestures work. It shows that just because someone has a brain injury, it doesn't mean their communication is fundamentally broken. They might just have different strategies. And those strategies can be very effective. Looking ahead, this research opens up a lot of exciting possibilities. Future studies could explore how people with TBI handle more complex group situations, perhaps with even larger groups or longer delays between learning and testing, which would put more demand on memory. They could also look at how people with TBI react to real-time feedback from listeners, which is something this study didn't fully capture because the matchers were Confederates and couldn't give much feedback in the test phase. New technologies like wearable eye trackers and virtual reality could offer even more naturalistic ways to study this. Overall, this study is a powerful reminder that communication is a rich, multimodal dance. For individuals with TBI, their dance might look a little different, with unique rhythms in their gestures and gaze, but it can still be incredibly effective. It's a call to not underestimate their communicative abilities and to explore all the tools they use to connect with others. It really highlights how much we can learn by looking beyond just the words. What are your thoughts on these findings? Do you think about how you adapt your communication? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up, share it. And don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more fascinating insights into the human mind. See you next time.